Right, world leaders are currently meeting in Baku in Azerbaijan for those COP29 climate talks. Huge focus this year on how to finance poorer countries to help develop clean economies. Now, as ever, the global meeting comes as scientists warn that carbon emissions from fossil fuels are actually going to reach a new high this year. A leading global assessment found they're totaling 41.6 billion tonnes. That's up from 4.6 billion in 2023. 40.6 billion in 2023. It is, you know, even if you get muddled up with the points and the billions, frankly, quite depressing stuff. And unsurprisingly, the UN Secretary General Guterres is criticising the world for what he calls the doubling down on fossil fuels.
The sound you hear is the ticking clock. We are in the final countdown to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And time is not on our side. Exhibit A 2024, with the hottest day on record and the hottest months on record. This is almost certain to be the hottest year on record. And the masterclass in climate destruction. Families running for their lives before the next hurricane strikes. Workers and pilgrims collapsing in insufferable heat. Children going to bed hungry as droughts ravage crops. And all these disasters and more are being supercharged by human-made climate change.
Now, last year's climate change talks were, of course, held here in Dubai and actually ended very successfully with an agreement called the UAE Consensus. So, will this year's Baku talks manage to build on that arrangement? Well, to discuss that and more, I'm delighted to say I'm joined in the studio by His Excellency Sharif Salim Al-Olama. He is the Undersecretary for Energy and Petroleum Affairs in the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure. Sir, an absolute pleasure to have you join us in the studio. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Georgia. It's a pleasure being here with you today.
So we hear there about the struggles that the world is facing. The world has come together for COP29. We are obviously very hopeful for the success of that conference, in particular because we really did have a successful COP28, didn't we?
Well, let's take a step back, Georgia. COP28 was a success in every measure. It was the first global stocktake that was done, and it basically assessed how we as a global community were performing against what we all had agreed upon within the Paris Agreement. Yes, it was success where we did get a UAE consensus, a comprehensive action plan in terms of what we need to do to get the climate agenda back on track. The reality is once we did the assessment, we saw that we were off track significantly in every measure. Now, that is the reality. The UAE consensus put together a comprehensive plan in terms of what we need to do as a global community to get things back on track. And it is very important that we see this kind of momentum see its way through in COP29, COP30 as we move forward. Now, COP29 is one of the events where I believe we need to tie up whatever ambitions and plans we had into measurable actions. There are some key aspects COP29 will focus on. The major one would be, from my perspective, is financing and funding, it being public or private financing. In order to achieve what we are anticipating to doing, there has to be necessary funds available. And this is where we are looking into the financial institutes across the world in terms of supporting a lot of the initiatives and great ideas that are in place. There are some other key aspects, I believe, that will be captured within COP29. There is going to be a lot of focus when it comes to district cooling, which is an efficient manner in terms of cooling. There will be some focus that will be put with regards to water. Water scarcity is going to be a major issue, a global major issue. From our perspective, also as the UAE, we are homing in and we are zooming in into energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, from my perspective, and I believe from the perspective of a lot of individuals that I engage with, is not being given the proper attention. We are, as the UAE, hopeful that in COP29, we are gathering pace in terms of forming what we call a global energy efficiency alliance. The idea over here is to give enough focus to this very important aspect and get a lot of the countries on board in this pledge. Energy efficiency, very simply put, is the best form of emission reduction is the kilowatt hour or the energy that you don't consume. I think that is the starting place before we start thinking about how many solar plants we need to build, how many nuclear plants we need to build, how much of the emissions we need to capture. So this is really the starting point for me.
COPs always start a bit depressing. They're like, we always start at the beginning of the 2-week process because these are 2-week long talks. And at the start, it is always, with, Antonio Guterres, he always goes over the sort of ghastly situation. You get lots of reports from the UN and the World Meteorological Organization to tell you where we are at the moment. And as a consequence, I think anyone who's not working in the sector starts to feel incredibly depressed. I think there's this thing called climate fatigue, which I think we all slightly get, this feeling of not being able to do anything because you've got this big overarching problem and you just don't know what to do. Are there things that everyday people can do to improve their efficiencies, for example, to reduce their own carbon sort of footprint?
Definitely, Georgia. I think we have a saying in Arabic is a single hand cannot clap. So there are two, and I think in English they say it takes two to tango. We as a government, not only the UAE, but I am talking about all governments around the world, we can do only so much. You can establish certain laws, certain policies, develop certain strategies with comprehensive plans that would get us to where we need to be. But at the end of the day, it is the individual, it is the society that actually needs to react to these policies, to these laws, to these regulations. We believe in a bottom-up approach. It has to start with the individual in order for us to achieve our targets. Let me just say, hypothetically, if today we were blessed with a new Earth, okay? We go through a time warp back, say, 500 years, and we are blessed with Earth with less emissions. And if it is business as usual, a few hundred years down the road, we are going to be exactly in the same predicament we are today. So, which means that there has to be changes. I believe that the individual has a lot of contribution towards what we as governments are aspiring to do. It starts at home, if you allow me to say. And I'll give a personal experience. A few years back, my wife actually came back home, and she's pretty conscious about the environment. And she actually installed 2 boxes, garbage boxes in the house, one for plastics and one for, paper waste. And she kept on encouraging the kids to actually dispose of the plastic in the plastic box. And of course, the kids started asking why are we segregating waste? And that's where I had to intervene and explain to them, what plastics does to the environment and where does this plastic go and how do we deal with it? The society has a big role to play, and that's why in the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure, we have established a tailor-made campaign. We call it Safe to Sustain. And the idea is this campaign targets basically 5 key groups. We're talking about students, we're talking about families, we are talking about employees, workers, and tourists. We have done quite a lot when it comes to reaching out to these groups of people. So when you talk about the students, we have been working with the Ministry of Education where we have established a green curriculum. The best time to actually educate individuals is when they are at a small age. When you're talking about elementary students, once they pick up that, environmental responsibilities are key and how decisions they make at their homes affects the environment, it sticks with them. And once it sticks with them, it actually sees itself through to the next and the next and the next generation. Parents at homes have a big responsibility. I gave the example of my wife. And I think every parent has that responsibility to instill this kind of thinking in their children. We have also worked closely with two of the airlines where there have been some educational material put on airlines, within the magazines that you can get as an airline passenger, that actually goes into sustainability practices. And the idea over there was we were targeting the tourists that are coming into the country. We've held, I think, somewhere in the range of 6 to 10 workshops with laborers, where we are educating them in terms of what are the best practices that they need to apply in their workplaces or even at where they reside in terms of saving energy and being more energy efficient. It comes down to this. It comes down to decisions that are made. When I do go and, for example, I buy appliances for my home, I have two types of appliances. One that is energy efficient, that might cost a little bit more, and one that is less. But in the long run, if you do the math, the energy efficient appliance actually saves you money in the long run. And at the same time, it reduces the emissions that you are creating for the environment. My advice to a normal person is to have a little bit of more insight into what kind of carbon footprint is he providing to the environment. And once you start measuring that, then you start actually challenging yourself, saying, what else can I do? Where can I improve? Can I actually start installing LED lights? Can I start actually being more conscious in terms of setting my air conditioner on at 24 degrees or 23 degrees rather than always keeping it at 19 degrees and super cold? It is these little decisions that are made on an individual-wise basis makes the bigger difference.
Really interesting there to get your advice. We are listening to the voice of His Excellency Sharif Salim Al-Olama, Undersecretary for Energy and Petroleum Affairs in the Ministry of Energy. We are going to continue our conversation with His Excellency